We are already displaying venues in a list view inside of our new travel page. And we mentioned that now the user should be able to select one of these venues, create some experience, save the post, but now the post should also be saved along with some information about the venue that was selected. And to be able to do that, the first thing that we are supposed to do is change the model itself, the model of the post that currently is being saved. So we're going to open the post file, where currently we have a class that only has 2 properties. And in here, we're going to add the properties necessary for the post. One way of doing this would be to create a venue property or a venue root property, which contains all of the information. But this is probably too much for the post class, especially once it is inserted into the database, because we don't really need everything that is inside of a venue. I'm also going to open the venue file to check the classes that are inside. And for example, what we do need is the name of the venue, but we may not need its ID and all of the elements inside of the category and the location. So I will add these properties to the post class as well, and then get the values directly from the corresponding properties inside of the venue. So let's first define the name for the venue. I'm going to define a new property with a prop snippet, so I can just click tab twice and I have this new property ready. This is going to be a string and it's going to be venue name. I'm not going to add any attributes to this one. I'm also going to need the name and the ID of the category. So in fact, I can just copy this from the category, head back to the post class, paste them, and I want to change this a little bit. This is going to be category ID, and this one is going to be category name. I will also need some information from the location, starting with the address, which I'm also going to copy. I'm just going to change the name to start with a capital A, and I will add a couple of double properties. The first one is going to be latitude, and the second one is going to be longitude. And finally, I'm also going to be using the distance. But this is pretty much everything that I'm going to be using in here. All of the other information, I'll just leave it in the other classes, in case we use them to display information inside of the new travel page, but the post is not really going to have all of that information. With these properties, it's going to be okay. So what I have to do now is assign the value to those properties when saving the value. So I have in the new travel page C# file the event handler for the clicked event of the toolbar item, where I'm currently creating a new post with only the experience and it's being saved. It is in here where we want to get the information for the selected item inside of the list view and get that information into the corresponding properties that we have just added to the post class. So the first thing that we have to do is get that selected item. And that is pretty straightforward. All we have to do is create a new variable, which is going to be selected venue. And that is going to be equal to whatever is selected inside of the venue list view. Now the selected item, of course, is an object. So to be able to get it as a venue, all we have to do is do a cast like this. And now the value for the selected venue variable is going to be of type venue. And having that, we can go to the definition of the post variable, or the post object that we have in here, and after the experience, start establishing the rest. For example, we can set the category ID to be whatever is in the selected venue, and in the categories property, but the categories property is a list. So first we actually have to get the first category as well. So what we can do is create another variable, which is going to be first category, that is going to be equal to selected venue.categories.first or default, like this. And now first category is going to be of type category. So category ID, instead of getting the value directly from selected value, we can get it from first category.id. Now the reason why we need this is because in a venue, in a single venue, there could be many categories. The only thing that we're going to be doing here is getting the first category. So if there are 2 or 3 or 4, we're only going to take a look at the first category. And this first or default method is exactly what it does. It gets the first category listed inside of this property. And in case there is no category at all, we won't have to worry about getting any errors in here, because this first or default method is going to handle that. Something different to what would happen if we use only first. First is another method which gets the first element the same way as a first or default, but in the case there is no value inside of this list, then we would probably get some errors. So let's use first or default. Besides the category ID, we should also get the category name. And we can get it again from the first category property and the name. And so we can continue. For example, the address is going to be equal to selected venue.location.address. The distance is also going to be inside of the location property for the selected venue. Then the latitude is also going to be in the location. The same for the longitude. And the venue name is going to be directly inside of the selected venue. And that's it. This is the new post that we are supposed to be inserting. I'm going to save the changes. And there is another thing that I would like to do in here, which is going to be to prepare for in the case of one of these properties is null. If we try to access a property that is null, we're going to get an exception. An exception occurs when an error happens and it throws that exception to whoever caused the execution. For example, let's say that first category is going to be null because there is no categories at all in the selected venue. Then, if we want to access the first category variable in here and access one of its properties, this is going to be null. And because this is null, we cannot access its values. And so this line is going to generate an exception. And that exception is going to be thrown to whoever is calling this line. In this case, the toolbar item clicked method. In case this method doesn't handle that exception, it is going to be thrown to whoever called this method. And so on and so forth until someone catches the exception. And if no one catches the exception, the program will crash. The application will close. So let's handle a potential exception that could happen in here. And to handle exceptions, we have to get our code inside of a try catch block. First, we get a try. And the try is going to be all of this code, all of the code inside of this method. So all of these lines inside of the try block are going to be executed normally, but in case something happens inside of this try block, we can catch it with a catch block. And when catching something, we have to define what type of exception are we going to catch. And so we can define the exception, which is the most general definition of the exception. And we can even define a variable, which is going to be of type exception, and that is going to have some information of whatever exception happens. And in case an exception happens, we can get a breakpoint in here, which would pause the execution for us to be able to evaluate the value in this X variable, so we can know a little bit better about what exception is happening in here. Now we can catch multiple types of exceptions. For example, if we wanted to catch another exception, all we have to do is add another catch block. And there are multiple exception types. For example, there could be an index out of range exception, invalid cast exception. The one that I think is likely to occur is the null reference exception, which occurs exactly when something is null and is being trying to be accessed. And so I am going to define another variable in here, which is going to be NRE for nullable reference exception, and I'm going to add its own block. And I can also add a breakpoint inside of this catch. So what is happening in here is that I'm going to catch any exception that is of type null reference exception. And if the exception that occurs is of another type, then this catch block is going to handle it. It's important to mention in here that the most particular the exception is, it has to go closer to the try block. This means that the first defined catches are the ones to be evaluated first. And by most particular, I mean those who are children from other exception classes. And the exception class we mentioned that is the parent of all the exceptions, is the most general exception. And so all of the exception inherit from this class. So if we were to define this one before the null reference exception, the exception is going to be caught by this catch block, and this would have no use because it's after a more general exception. So the more general the exception is, it has to be further from the try block. And so let's go ahead and try this out. We're already assigning values to a post. we are saving those values. We are trying to catch any exception that may happen. Let's open the history page.saml.cs file in which we are reading all the posts, and I'm going to set a breakpoint after getting those posts. So I evaluate if those posts that are being inserted already have some information. And remember that we are already getting the selected item inside of the venue list view. So we're going to take a look at how to select that item and if this is working already. So here I have the application. I'm going to log in. Currently, the posts that are going to be read are only the ones that were already saved. And of course, if we expand this, we will see that the value for the new properties is null because when we saved these elements, there was no information there, so there's no value. But if we click continue and navigate to the new travel page and we set some location so we can get the venues for some location, we should now be able to select one of these elements. Notice that when we select one of them, it turns, in this case, orange, which means that it is selected. So we can select whatever item we want in here, and we can still write some value inside of the experience. And we can click on save. We have still successfully inserted this value. And if we navigate back, let's check out what the new post is about. Notice that there is a new post. Now the count is 4. It was 3 the first time. Let's expand this new value and notice that indeed we have a value for the venue name, the longitude, the latitude, the distance, the category name, the category ID, and the address. So we are now successfully inserted the selected value into the database and we are already able to read it. Of course, currently what we display is still only the experience. What we want to do is take advantage of all of the new information that we have just saved inside of the post. So in the next lecture, we're going to use the latitude and the longitude to display all of these saved elements into the map that we already have as well.